Hey toy fans, Aaron here. Today starting my look at the Mandalorian wave of retro collection figures, and first up, as you can see, is the Mandalorian himself. This wave of figures still maintains the look of the retro collection, and that gives you the worn out white edges all around the card. The rest of the card does look like the vintage line, and in this case looks very much like what we received for the vintage collection release of the Mandalorian action figure. So you got that Star Wars Mandalorian logo, very same image that we had on the vintage collection release is being used here for the retro collection, and we still have that large retro collection sticker on the front of the card, and of course through the blister you get a good look at the action figure. And here's a look at the back of the card where, yes, still the white worn edges. The top half of the card basically talks about how the retro collection was inspired by the 1970s Star Wars figures. Through the middle of the card in that red section are the listing of the other action figures that are available in this line. That Remnant Trooper is not an individually carded release. You're going to find that with the Mandalorian Monopoly edition. And then bottom half of the card is your legal information. Taking a look at the figure out of the packaging, I think overall there's a lot to like about this figure. And if you're not familiar, yes, these action figures are meant to look like the ones from back when I was a kid. You know, just your basic, 5-point articulation and super basic sculpting to go along with it. But for what this needs to be, I really think it hits the mark. Just for comparison, real quick, here's how that vintage collection release of the Mandalorian action figure looks. And I think they did a really good translation of that into this basic form. Overall, a lot of the colors are pulled over. You got that classic vinyl cape. One thing I noticed between these two figures is that the retro collection version does stand a little bit shorter. I can't find my measuring tape, but I'd say, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch. Certainly under 1/4 of an inch shorter though. And that's something you'll also see when it's lined up at the end of the video with some other retro collection figures, is he's even shorter among those. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but it is something that becomes quite noticeable. And looking in at the head sculpt of the action figure, overall, things are looking good here. I mean, the helmet itself is already a basic design to begin with. And what little details there are on the helmet, notably on the sides of the helmet, is done in a very basic manner, much like the original line. So not super detailed, but you're still getting the point of how the character looked. Overall, silver painting looks very nice, very metallic. Honestly, I feel like maybe it's just a bit too bright of silver, but I'm probably being a little nitpicky on that. Black painting for the visor looks fantastic, staying right where it needs to be. And then on the back side of the helmet, you got these little vent lines or whatever sculpted in there. That vinyl cape that I mentioned looks great, very much in line with the classic line of figures. Although I suppose for the Return of the Jedi line of figures, we did start to get more cloth pieces for their capes and robes. But I do like that they're staying with the vinyl here. Overall, it has a very nice dark chocolate color to it. Fits well over the action figure and stays in with what they generally do for capes. For Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, the vinyl wrapped around the front of the body. An action figure like Lando, it kind of just came out a little bit to the sides like this one does. And then you can certainly just slide that off over the arms and reveal the rest of the action figure. And for the arms of this figure, detailing and paint job looks just fantastic. They've really captured the overall look of the costume quite well with the blue and the cream color on one shoulder armor piece, brown on the other. You got the brown chest armor in the center. Nice gray painting for his undersuit with some rib texturing being placed around the neck. Kind of some soft folds through the arms at the elbow area where, would otherwise bend. Back of the elbows has some quilted pattern being done there. Brown gauntlets on each arms looks good. Decent sculpting to it for what they're trying to replicate. And a couple more cream color armor pieces painted on the top of the hands. Back on the chest again, you got a bandolier sculpted in running over his left shoulder down to his waist. And a pretty decent belt sculpted in. Nice added touch of silver for the belt buckle. Little pouch sculpted off to the screen right side of that. And then even on his back side of his belt, you got a little, I don't know what that would be, pouch, or maybe that's to hold the weapon if it was actually functional. And then on the side of his thigh, you do have a holster sculpted in. That's not functional, keeping in line with what they did, or rather didn't do, for the action figures back in the day. And legs look pretty much exactly like you would expect them to look. Gray color continues for the undersuit. You got a nice mix of brown and cream color armor pieces for the front of his thighs. Touch of blue for his kneecap armor, and then brown on the other leg. And then you got a little bit of detailing for those, I forget what they were, the little capsules on the front of his shin. Little strap of brown painted in on there also. And then for his feet and the rest of those armor pieces, kind of just basic sculpting. So for the articulation, you got full swivel at the head, same for both shoulders. And then the legs swing straight out and only a smidge back, which is fine because if he had his cape on, you're not going to get that much movement anyways. And then for accessories, you get two of them. You get his blaster rifle and his pistol. First up, looking at the blaster rifle, the overall detailing of the sculpt seems quite in line with how it looked in the show. Obviously not as highly detailed as we got for a vintage collection release, but staying very much in line with what was done back in the 70s and early to mid 80s. So that's to say you still have a relatively decent amount of sculpting being done, certainly highlighting the scope on the top of the rifle, the prong end on the front, and then just a few other little design highlights just to, liven it up a bit. And you've even got a little bit of texturing on the handle of the blaster, and no problem with this weapon fitting in either hand. It stays in place and doesn't want to seem to fall out. And then as far as that blaster pistol, here also, pretty basic sculpt to it, but, it looks like a blaster. A little bit of details being done to make it look like a weapon. And then same as that rifle, it's done in an all-black color. Obviously no other special weathering or anything done, since that's not what was done in the line back at that time. And then same for this weapon. It can fit well in either hand. So overall for me, like I said, it's really exciting to get a line of figures that were never done in the original styling. And as someone that grew up with those original figures, I think that's a lot of the appeal for me is, it's bringing back the look of my childhood figures for action figures and movie properties that are brand new. And with that said, here you can see it with just a handful of those retro collection figures, only because I was too lazy to dig out my originals. But he blends in well. It all works together. And as a collector, I can really only say just more of this, please. I really like this. I like that they're bringing some of these figures back. And I like that we're getting new ones to go along with it. So that's going to wrap this one up. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this figure in the comments section below. And as always, thanks for watching.